101.1 FM KFUG Crescent City.
I'll light the fire.
You are listening to Counterculture Radio. I'm your host, Dan Schultz. We have Jim Willie of GoldenJackass.com, editor of the Hat Trick newsletter. Welcome to the show.
It's good to be back. It's been a little while, and we've got more breakdown developments and a lot of things going on. And gosh, you know, it's hard to get accustomed to on a daily basis to the concept that we're facing global change, like paradigm shift, major shocks. This is hard to adjust to. And for instance, I'm having some minor sleeping pattern alterations, and it's not pleasant.
Yeah, you know, I think it's one thing to realize, yes, okay, this is the decline of an empire, but to live in historic time, not only to live in historic times and see the standard of living issue, I think is probably more difficult than anything for Americans. We're so used to our luxuries and conveniences and comforts, struggling, or maybe the lack of food. Maybe Hollywood is helping us with all these dystopian films, but it is something. You mentioned pre-show that you know, it's a little weird, and you know, and to some degree we're projecting, we're speculating, we're predicting this future, but it certainly seems mathematically, and as you so well describe, these patterns, this information that you're collective, this inductive reasoning that you do so well, Jim, that things really are changing.
I think since Lehman, since the housing bust, since the mortgage finance collapse, subprime and all that, since the Lehman event in 2008, the U.S. citizens, the population, have suffered a quantum decline, a one-step decline in their standard of living. It's from the aftershock of exporting, outsourcing industry that resulted in a shock with dependence on housing and mortgage finance. The 2008 collapse was the shockwave realized from 2 decades of outsourcing. In the next few years, we're going to see, I think, 2 more quantum level declines, because the U.S. is going to lose its dollar.
Well, hold on a second, Jim. I have an article right in front of me. You obviously haven't read it. Associated Press says that a surge in hiring last month helped drive the nation's unemployment rate down to a 6-year low of 5.9%, within striking distance of what economists consider a healthy level. Clear you didn't get the news.
Well, I get different news. I get reality news, not toilet paper garbage. That news report has to do with the people who are still receiving state unemployment insurance. What I prefer to look at is the shadow government statistics, which is showing 23% or more unemployment and a fast falling participation rate. No, we've got just tremendous decline. All you have to do is drive by a few malls and look at how many are closed shops. All you have to do is read about what's going on in Detroit, where entire neighborhoods are being bought by the Chinese, while entire neighborhoods are being disconnected from water and electricity. We've got vast tracts of U.S. now being purchased as industrial parks by foreign carpetbaggers. And they're holding treasuries in their purchases. You know, we got a lot of weird things going on right now. The suppressed gold price has resulted in quite a few mining companies cutting back on budgets for exploration and projecting as an industry a 50% decline in gold mine output in the next year or two. So, you know, these are end game characteristics, and I'm getting more and more indications on what this end game is looking like, but I believe Europe, especially Germany, is critical for the quantum changes to come for the United States. Russia and China.
Why is Germany so important?
Well, Germany is the powerhouse European economy. They're the only European economy with a tremendous industrial base that did not get shipped off to China. For instance, Spain, a lot of the industries, factories, foundries, small shops for producing things, they all got shut down. They're gone. They're dead. And it's no wonder that their economy is going to hell in a handbasket. No wonder that their austerity plans are not resulting in anything positive. Spain's going to hell with their economy. Their debt's going out of sight. And Germany is still trucking along. They've got some dents, some bumps from the Russian sanctions. But Germany is important because it has largely, as a nation, been financing the European Union for its debt provision. The southern nations experience the debt, the Germans come in and buy it. Bailouts come in for Greece, the Germans finance the bailout. The Germans are really fed up with this. The Germans are the most critical element of the European Monetary Union that shares the euro currency. They're the one with the trade surplus. So I think this year they're pretty much near zero or slightly negative, and the current year is going to be, I think, a little bit negative, but not horrible. On a per capita basis, Germany should have 1/3 of the U.S. size. Now they're 85 million, so not quite 4 times smaller, but 3 to 4 times. All right, the U.S. has a $400 billion trade deficit. Does Germany have a $100 billion trade deficit? No, they're roughly even. So the U.S. is the critical dead element walking, the zombie walking. Germany is the most critical member of the European Union. They own 90% of French government debt. They own significant portions of Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and Greece debt.
I'm curious, Jim, why? I mean, it must be self-serving to a degree. Why does Germany foot the bill for this stuff?
Because their elite signed them up for the euro currency. Their elite
save the currency, huh?
Well, their elite had an agenda, and most of the German citizens did not want to give up the Deutschmark. They did not want to join the European Union. They did not want to have a euro common currency. They did not want to follow what some call the revived Roman Empire. It's never worked. I believe the European Union was brought together in order to kill it. I have some really nasty news. I shared it with my subscriber base in the last month, but do you remember the Germans requested in 2011 gold repatriation?
Right.
They asked from the New York Fed for their 330 tons back. That was 3 years ago. Well, last year, pretty much the New York Fed admitted, no, you're really not going to get it back. Then late this past year, early this year, we heard that they got 7 tons back. I mean, there are lots of side stories about fabricating a new war in Mali, and it's just insane. The U.S. likes to have a war to steal somebody's gold. But I found out the proximal cause for the German request of their gold repatriation, and some people erroneously state this is the Germans' gold reserve. No, it's not. It's not even 1/10 of their gold reserve. They got over 4,000 tons. So this is 1/10 or less. I found out the proximal cause. Back in 2011, in early months, the Obama administration, State Department, I think the NATO advisors, gave a briefing to the German government about their planned war in Ukraine, their planned coup d'etat, their planned separation of Europe from its energy supply in Russia, the planned interruption to the Gazprom pipelines. And the Germans said, "Are you out of your mind?" And then they said a few days later, "We want our gold back." Sitting in the New York Fed. We got 330 tons there. "You guys are insane. We want our gold back." And the New York Fed wouldn't even let parliamentary delegation from the German government even see their gold. It's all gone. All right, so the break with Germany started 3 years ago. I point out 4, I call them indictment charges. The gold repatriation, okay, fine. Related to that is the impact to the German economy from Russian sanctions. I mean, so far it's kind of kids' play, kid gloves, child's play with the sanctions that Russia imposed in reverse on agricultural products, food, meat, whatever. The third violation in the indictment is the NSA. It's not eavesdropping. They're not trying to find out Merkel's sex toys or Merkel's lunch plans. They're trying to find out the German strategy with working with Russia and China for a return of a gold standard. They're trying to get integrated into the Siemens telecom system, eavesdropping for entire German society with their phone calls. And the fourth violation is something that doesn't get sufficient press. The Germans are fed up with the Draghi Euro Central Bank and their plans for bond monetization. He's got a plan for far more than just buying Southern European sovereign bonds, the tainted, low-quality sovereign bonds. Draghi has a plan to buy up all kinds of mortgage bonds. He has a plan to buy up corporate bonds. He has a plan to buy stock market packages from indexes. He has a plan that's far more diverse than the Fed, but not as big in volume. And the German High Court, along with the Bundesbank, their central bank, has been saying, we don't want this. We don't want you to do any bond monetization. It's all bad. It's no good. There's tremendous negative consequences. There are unintended consequences. We want you to stop. And Draghi said, no, it's necessary. We need the stimulus. You hear the word stimulus a lot, Dan. It's not stimulus. It kills capital. The bond monetization kills capital because what it does is it in an unsterilized way, which means they're not removing funds elsewhere. They're just shoving in a lot of money into the system. And the smart players, the ones who actually try to defend themselves, are buying up commodities and hard assets. What the result is a rise in the whole cost structure, including food. So businesses have shrinking profit margins. More of them shut down. This is what they call stimulus. Business shut down from higher cost structure. It's not stimulus.
Right.
In the Wales summit, this was early September, Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, indicated an impossible set of alliance commitments. It didn't get much press. In fact, all they did was talk about, oh, Wales is over, it's all good, everybody was shaking hands, and we got some little minor complaints about Ukraine, but we're all on board. What they didn't report is that Germany was essentially saying, we cannot honor the NATO commitments. And last week, Germany and France reiterated, they cannot honor the NATO commitments.
What was it that they couldn't honor?
Commitment to war, commitment to missile placements, commitment of fighter jets, tanks, men, the war commitment. They cannot honor the commitment for war. NATO is about peace, and lately it's about war. The U.S. has turned the dollar defense into a war exercise and sanctions.
Yes.
On the financial side, sanctions. On the military front, it's war, and the consequence is severe economic impact. Now we're seeing the bond yields in Europe hit radical lows. I featured in my recent report the Southern European bonds, and they're all way down in yield. Okay, well, what's behind that? Well, the stock markets weren't all that bad, going into mid-September. So you had stock rally and bond rally. Can you say the Draghi Euro Central Bank? They're buying up the stock market. They're buying up the bond market. This is not a legitimate exercise of free market enterprise. The free markets are gone.
Yeah.
And we just had news yesterday, reiterated today, German factory orders in August alone down 5.7%. Export orders down 8.4%. The Germans are split. They've got their bankers led by the politicians. I'm sorry, the politicians led by the banks. Yeah, I got that backward. The bankers and their leaseholders as leaseholders to the politicians. And on the other side, you've got the corporate chieftains, I call them, the executives. And they told Merkel right before the Wales NATO summit in early September, they told Merkel, back off. Just make a statement, make a stand, back off. And that was the beginning. And last week we saw a continuation of that. And I think we're going to see more. There are 3,000 to 5,000 German companies that do business with Russia, some significantly. All the giant German companies, the conglomerates, they all do significant work and trade with Russia. They're not going to give it up. Dan, they're not going to give it up. Just today, Serbia in Eastern Europe, Serbia announced that they're going to continue with the South Stream construction. Russia announced that the Black Sea connection is just about complete, or if not complete. So we're seeing many nations pay lip service to the United States government while working with the Russians quietly.
I'd like to have access to NSA files and hear actually, who do the, in quotation marks, leaders of Germany and these other nations, who do they listen to? Do they listen to the bankers? Who do they follow? Or do they listen to their corporate master? I wonder, to the degree, do they really care about their people and their economy? I suspect that half of these people are sociopaths and the other people are just concerned about themselves and getting elected, or how much money they have. I wonder if Merkel really does care about the German economy.
They're following orders, Dan. And the tough question is, whose orders? I have a rough idea, and it has to do with the agenda of dragging down the European economy, the European system, the whole financial structure, while the U.S. is being dragged down, and the installation of a Western Europe and North American totalitarian fascist state. So, who's giving the orders? I believe it's the Rothschild family. They're the owners of over 80% of the global central banks, the major owner, major partner. There are only a few central banks in the world that are not run by the Rothschilds. They are Iran, Syria, and North Korea. All the rest are basically run by Rothschild entities, partners, or people who take orders.
Even Russia.
Perhaps not Russia. I left them out. There's a lot of debate right now as to what extent that family has for Russian and Chinese central bank dealings. I'd like to leave that alone because we've got enough to talk about with Europe. It's a debatable point. It's something that deserves continuous research. And I'm of the mind that the BRICS are not dominated by the Rothschilds. And the biggest piece of evidence for that is that Basel, Switzerland, the Bank for International Settlements, is making a formal request on a regular basis for a role in the BRICS finance team, offering their experience. So what you got is a pack of wolves knocking on the huge henhouse factory barn, saying, we'd like to be included as your guards.
Will this fracturing of NATO and Germany, and will they break off in time to save a regional or a world war?
I think it's pretty clear that the economic damage and the truce in Ukraine, followed by the continuation of the Gazprom pipelines, will ensure that Germany and most of Europe will turn their backs on the United States.
Wow.
I think the economic impact of the Russian sanctions is devastating. The lesson is pretty simple. Join the U.S. and lose your economic footing with a very serious impact. Recession, industrial output decline, job loss. These are the fruits of U.S. alignment. So join the Ukraine war with sanctions, only to lose a large trade partner with huge potential in Russia. Russia is European. Their Siberian side is where a lot of their mines and their drilling, their resources and minerals are east of the Urals. But they've got a European entity, and what the U.S. is trying to do is cut off Russia, European Russia, from Europe, and it's just not going to work. The Kremlin gave a sample of the cutoff taste with the blockade of food, the reverse sanctions of food imports, and the most devastation, the greatest damage, is with Spain. They're seeing their food rot. The Russians were ready, and they got a South American alternative supplier. I think it was arranged during the World Cup when Putin and Merkel were talking with the Brazilian leaders in the elite box at the World Cup finals. The hidden threat is, I think, something not discussed at all. China could enter Southern Europe and do acquisitions of large agri-farm businesses that are struggling, facing bankruptcy, violations of bank covenants. They come in and they take on a big stake and later a bigger stake, and before you know it, controlling interest. and they export the Spanish food to China. So this is not in the news. Notice the Kremlin has not used their big natural gas card in a big way. It's a huge card. It's a powerful thing. I hear the phrase of sword of Damocles. Yeah, okay. They have not said, hey, look, stop all of your sanctions. Just stop it, or we're going to cut off all the gas to Europe. They haven't done that. They have a dependence of income from the European purchase of their oil and gas. Just a quick fact, of all the German natural gas used, 40% comes from Russia. In Germany, of all the crude oil used in Germany, 30% comes from Russia. So they're not going to cut that off. And if they do, they'll kill their economy. So the economic impact of the Russian sanctions is very, very harsh. The changes have already begun. There have been some minor cutbacks, like in Poland. Poland's getting special treatment because they threatened also, they threatened a couple things regarding Russia. They said, we'll do some reverse flow and help out Ukraine. Well, that's in violation of contracts. So Russia said, okay, we're going to cut you off by, I think, 28%, reduced by 28% the gas flow. Then Poland also was the staging ground for all the Soros mercenaries that did the coup d'etat in Ukraine that they all blamed on Russia. I mean, it's insane. The stories are insane. I heard a really smart European client and a bit of a source of information to me said recently, we in Europe notice things about how the Americans are treating Russia. They're treating the Russians like the Sudan. You can't do that. You can't have a coup d'etat by Langley, the CIA, by Soros, and by another security agency starting with an M. I call them mass wipes out of a southeast Mediterranean nation. You can't have those three entities conduct a coup d'etat in Kiev and then blame it all on Russia. You can't do that. You can't treat them like Sudan. So there's some real harsh consequences coming.
I wonder, actually, Jim, if some of the actions already taken have crossed the Rubicon. If they've gone too far against Russia and China.
Yes, way too far, and they just keep amplifying the damage to U.S. integrity every week or two. We had a delineation making quite specific that U.S. energy firms cannot do business with Russia. So, I don't want to get into a long discussion of the bankers versus the energy companies, but we've got some unusual things happening. The bank sanctions are very clear against Russia. The energy giant exceptions, like British Petroleum, Royal Dutch Shell, and ExxonMobil, the exceptions seem very clear. By the way, I've got a forecast that before the end of the year, the current regime in Ukraine is going to fall. It's going to have some impact with Europe in a very strange way. It's part of the truce. The truce is devastating for the Kiev government, as strange as that sounds. It means that they're going to have to stop fighting and they're going to have to start looking at the damage all around them. You're going to get some requests by Ukraine of tremendous, tremendous aid from the European Union, and they're not going to want to pay it. I mean, like not $3 billion, but like $20, $30, $40 billion. They're not going to want to pay it. I've also heard a strange item. This is from a very reliable source, that a price was put on Poroshenko's head, the leader of the Ukraine government, the leader of the Ukraine coup d'etat, the U.S. puppet. These guys all have kind of carrying cards from the mass wipes in the southeast Mediterranean coast security agency. So price is put on Poroshenko's head, and all of the money that he stole from the previous oligarch is going to be returned. They're going to steal it back. And we're going to get a new criminal running Ukraine because we still have a hands-off. The whole world is telling Russia, keep your hands off. All right, we'll get a change of the guard of a different criminal, and maybe another couple or three regime changes in the future. We'll see a Russian participation, and we'll get a legitimate leader who's more honest. I think by the end of the year, you're going to see a regime fall and a new one come in. The end of this year, yes. They're not going to make it through the harvest season. They got food problems. They may have only planted 80% of the fields in Ukraine, in their rich western farm fields. But what about the commitment of trucks, farm machinery, men, diesel, roadways being accessible. I think they're going to have a disaster in getting the harvest to market. It's going to be a general disaster causing a food price explosion, a food shortage problem, and they're not going to get through. These guys are already bugging out. I heard in mid-September that the ministers in the various offices in Ukraine were leaving the country. So I don't think this regime is going to last much longer.
If your predictions come true before, how accurate have you been?
Well, since the newsletter began in 2004, some significant forecasts have come to pass. I made forecasts at the beginning of the newsletter in 2004 and 2005 that the U.S. housing market would go bust and we would have a complete collapse of the mortgage finance market, and the result would be grotesque insolvency of the U.S. major banks. I think that all came true with the Lehman event. And the confirmation came when the Financial Accounting Standards Board in April 1st, 2009, announced, blessed by the U.S. Congress, that all these big banks can cite whatever they want for their assets and portfolios. They can value them all. Don't worry about mark to market. Mark to market is kind of an inconvenience. So that was one. I had a forecast a month in advance of the Lehman collapse. I got tipped off by the voice. I was telling clients in early and mid-August of the imminent event on the weekend of September 13th, 2008. I was told 3 entities would fail. I guessed 2 of them, Fannie Mae and Lehman. I did not guess AIG, but that's okay. The voice told me no one even guessed 1 of all the people he asked. I got 2 out of the 3. All right, the next correct forecast of significance that I had was, I said, following Lehman, we're going to go down to 0%. And then the next one I had was, once we got the near 0%, I said it's going to stay there forever. And that's turned out to be true. Here we are 5 years later. Then the next one I had was, I said we're going to have monetary easing, a QE event. So that came in 2011. Once we got that, realizing the correct forecast, I said the QE would go on to infinity with multiple layers of the same QE bond monetization, all of them unsterilized. And we got that.
Jim, Pat, you don't need to list them all. I just wanted to let the listeners know that you've been spot on.
Yeah, well, there's a more recent one to close off that string. Yeah. A lot of them have been monetary types, but here's a zinger. Back in the summer of 2013, the Fed, on the closing months of Bernanke, he was talking about taper talk. We're going to taper QE, and it roiled the markets, roiled a lot of things. I said, he's a liar. I said for 3 months straight, June, July, August, he's a liar. QE is not going to be reduced. Volume will continue. They depend on it critically for the interest rate swap derivative. 0% money comes in, short-term bonds, short-term bills, and it gets transformed into artificial long-term bonds. Demand, all the bond demand now is artificial. There are no buyers at all, except for tokenism by China and maybe Japan. No buyers at all of U.S. government debt, $1 trillion a year. Okay, I said they were a liar in September. I was proved correct. And now I'm saying that they're lying on the tapering. We're really not going to get confirmations because no one wants to talk about the increase to QE. I think we're going to get an explosion of QE, Dan, as foreign nations dump their treasuries when they realize they're not needed to buy crude oil. And that's coming up real soon.
Why I like to have you on the show is you not only have inside sources, but you see the patterns and you have a deep understanding of what actually is happening in the world.
There seems to be a U.S. government strategy here. I think it's a failed strategy regarding Europe. It's like they're courting the fringe and they're losing the core. Here's what I mean by that. They're courting minor nations. Notice that Obama was just seen with one of the Baltic nation leaders. I think it was Estonian leader, who was educated in the United States. These guys are planted fascist puppet leaders. Poland now is a best buddy of the United States. It's suicidal. Poland has never been on the right side of anything in the last 100 years.
Therefore, you can deduce that
they're on the wrong side here. They're used as, they offered as a staging ground the mercenaries for going in for the coup d'etat in Ukraine. The Polish are trying to obstruct the South Stream pipeline for Gazprom. One particular leader of the EU, and I don't remember the firm details, but one of them is a fool that is in the U.S.'s pocket, another puppet. So what the U.S. has done is promised the European nations that the U.S. will compensate for the lost Russian energy and commodity provision, in particular the energy provision. We're promising them the LNG provision for natural gas. We don't have adequate ships for it. We don't have adequate nodes, those huge things with a funny roof. We're not ready for any of this. Yet we're promising this, and we're going to lose the core. We got blockades of Gazprom South Stream in nations like Bulgaria, nations like Serbia. Serbia just made an announcement they're going to continue with the South Stream. So they're giving lip service to the Americans, accepting the bribes. Hillary and Biden are all over the place in Eastern Europe, trying to pave the way to block the South Stream for the Russian Gazprom pipelines. It's not going to work. We're seeing the effect of participating with the U.S. plan, with economic sanctions, the backlash, the lost business with Russian imports. This is all disastrous. So I heard some estimates that the Baltic nations, as a result of the Russian sanctions, could see at least a 35% and maybe as much as a 50% recession in 1 year. So I don't understand the mindset of the Europeans who continue to pay attention to the EU commissioners who were all unelected. The EU commissioners are waging war, giving orders to the sovereign nations. These are the warlords. These are the overlords. These are the banker supranational lords, the agents of the Rothschilds. Now, what you're going to see is the continuation of the U.S. plan to court the fringe nations like Estonia, Poland, Bulgaria, Ukraine, and I'm very disappointed in Norway. Norway has made some positive overtures toward the EU when they need to keep their independence because there are no big benefits of closer alliance with the EU. Some of these smaller nations with less developed economies, they think they're going to get some advantages from joining the European Union, like they're going to be able to export a lot of stuff into Central Europe. But what they're not paying attention to is the stricter standards requirements that very few of them meet. Ukraine does not meet the EU standards. So where's the benefit? Ukraine is an absolute disaster.
And Norway's so self-contained. They actually do pretty well there and even have food policies where all of so many percent, 80-90% of all of their food has to come from Norway, which is why you don't find vegetables there. I mean, they're sustainable compared to other countries anyways.
Yeah, they've also got what they call the pension fund. It's their sovereign wealth fund. And I believe it's valued at something on the order of $600 billion. So it might not be growing much lately from the declining oil price and declining North Sea output from their platforms. The best offshore engineers in the world are in Norway, state oil.
And to jump on a sinking ship, this doesn't sound like a good move for Norway.
No, they're seeing some advantages. I don't know exactly what's going on. I think there's more blackmail and violent threats involved than meets the eye. I'll give you one example. In 2011, there was an example in Oslo of a bombing incident. Again, the lone gunman, the lone worker, the lone guy in the violence. This is the same old CIA pattern. And what I heard behind the scenes was London was experiencing bank insolvency problems, and they wanted a giant infusion of Norwegian funds from their big sovereign wealth fund called the pension fund, Norwegian pension fund. They have $600 billion, and Norway told them, screw you. We don't want to get involved with your London bankers. You're a bunch of criminals. We don't want to get involved with you. You've got ulterior motives. We don't trust you. Weeks later, months later, they had an Oslo bombing incident. This is insane. We were told that Islamics were all through Norway causing problems with violence. God, this is nonsense.
Yeah. It's so sobering to realize that I used to be a red-blooded American, Jim. It's so sobering to realize that America is the biggest terrorist in the world.
No doubt about it.
How awful.
To defend the dollar, we've resorted to war.
Yeah.
In 2005, South Korea made an announcement that they were going to diversify some of their treasury bonds. They thought they were overweighted. The next thing you know, a week later, the United States Navy did some military exercises off their coast. We made some phone calls, and they changed their mind. That was subtle. Ukraine's not subtle, and Fukushima is not subtle. The Japanese made an announcement that they were going to be working closely with China for a regional new currency, gold-backed. A couple months later, Fukushima hit.
Yeah.
These are not natural events.
Yeah, we have HARP.
Yeah, that's best not to get into that. Let's just say that it happened,
Yep.
and Philippines announced they're going to work closely with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. They wanted to work on the regional currency. They had back-to-back hurricanes. They'd never had many hurricanes in Philippines. They have some, damaging typhoons, but nothing like that. A couple months later, the U.S. signed a huge military pact to expand, not just continue, their military base rentals, the leases. Now, to defend the dollar now means go to war. Any nation that wants to drop the dollar from their trade systems is branded a terrorist, is given sanctions, is treated to propaganda, and we go to war.
Yeah, it's not very appetizing, isn't it? It seems like they have no choice. But you're still predicting that the network is going to fall apart, that they are going to jump ship.
I think they already have. Germany's already decided to work closely with Russia and China on the new BRICS currency. They're not going to adopt, this is a wrong forecast of mine. It's not, it's wrong. It's more like a delayed and an altered event. But in 2009, I was told that we might have a Nordic euro that was gold-backed. And its architects, designers would be, participant members, would be Germany, Austria, Netherlands, and Finland. They would break away from the EMU, European Monetary Union, meaning the common euro currency union. And those four nations would go on their merry way. Well, it didn't happen. But what I'm hearing now is those same four nations, those are the ones with trade surpluses. They're the ones who finance the pigs nations of Greece and Spain and Italy and Portugal. These four nations are going to go straight, with Germany leading, go straight to the BRICS gold and silver-backed currency. And the letters of credit, the gold trade notes, the letters of credit. And this is kind of an endgame scenario, but when the dollar is used far less, you're going to see nations say, we don't want any more of your treasuries, we're trying to get rid of them. When the Saudis announced that non-dollar payment for crude oil, and then all of OPEC does the same, you're going to see a lot of nations of the world say, we don't want any more treasury bonds, we're trying to get rid of what we have. So the U.S. economy is going to struggle to be supplied with imports. The U.S. is going to have to abandon the dollar because it's not going to be good anymore. This is when the shockwave hits the United States and the standard of living goes down a couple of notches. The U.S. is going to have to print a new dollar, launch a new dollar. I'm calling it the Scheiss dollar because that's German for shit. The new Scheiss dollar is going to come into being. I'm hearing that there are some printed. They're blood red, which is very appropriate for the Satanists who are running the U.S. government and the banking industry. I'm hearing that it's going to be devaluated twice. The Chinese have demanded that it be devaluated by 50%. And the U.S. said, well, how about 30% and then later another 30%? The Chinese said, that's fine. We're not in control of our finance anymore. The Chinese now own the J.P. Morgan headquarters. I believe they are now principal partners in the Federal Reserve itself. So the U.S. is going to have a panic to supply its imports, to supply the economy via imports, because the Treasury bond is not going to be good anymore, which means the dollar has lost its currency reserve status. When they go to the new currency, it'll have to stand on its own. Well, what are its fundamentals? So you've got $1 trillion debt, no buyers of our government debt securities.
Not the best formula for success.
The new Treasury dollar, Treasury note dollar, as opposed to Federal Reserve note dollar, the new Treasury dollar is going to be devaluated out of the gate by 30%, followed by another 30%. And if you're looking for an example, look at Venezuela. almost exactly that happened. And devastating effects, not only on import prices up 200%, but other devastating effects where the nation is struggling to maintain its currency and takes its output that it does have and exports it, like food, like industrial output, like tires, like, you know, who knows? All kinds of things made in the United States are going to be exported to try to relieve the imbalance for our currency and to prevent a third 30% devaluation.
Which creates inflation.
And also creates shortages.
Yes. Now, this Treasury note dollar that you're talking about, Jim, what does that look like for people with, if they have $100,000 in the bank, when we had these devaluations, do they just lop off a percentage? Is that how it happens?
I don't have the answer to that. I only have conjecture. I mean, it's not like I called up JP Morgan to get answers. I mean, you can try 1-800-Lucifer. You might get customer service at JP Morgan. I don't have the direct answers, but I'm hearing that there's going to be a reduction in U.S. wealth. It's going to be a downgrade of U.S. dollar-based wealth. And that would seem to me to be consistent with stock account and bank account devaluations. So I think, yes, that could happen. I don't know for sure, but it seems logical. I'm also hearing that the debts will not be adjusted. So you're going to have a harder time paying off the debts.
Yeah.
And there's precedent of that in Mexico in the mid-1990s. The debts were not altered. The currency was worth less. So people had a bigger debt burden as a result. So it's all coming. It's inevitable because we've abused the dollar after we forfeited our industry. I like to point out the major exports from the United States are fraudulent treasury bonds, defrauded mortgage bonds, diabetes, genetically modified food seeds, and fast food hamburgers that aren't really beef.
And inflation.
The United States has no freaking idea what capitalism is. Our idea of stimulating the economy is print money, cover bonds, hand money to people who don't work. That's not capitalism. So as you stimulate, so-called, with this QE and bond monetization, you raise the costs, you lower the profit margin, you shut down businesses, you remove capital in the form of equipment from active usage, you lay people off, and how do you respond? You print more money. And this is a colossal, vicious cycle to wreck the U.S. economy. And I think it's done somewhat intentionally.
You think it's planned?
Obama, I was told in 2008, was selected, not elected. And his mission was twofold: wreck the U.S. economy and bring about the end of the dollar. How's he doing?
Jim, to wrap this up, what do people look for on CNN as a precipitating event for these dominoes to start falling?
Failure of Lehman.
Good answer.
0% interest rate, 0% policy, QE, bond monetization, more war.
Yeah.
We're already there. So for the final fracture, for perhaps putting the dollar in its coffin, the Chinese announcing that the gold price is $2,800 to $3,000 per ounce, the Chinese announcing that the new silver price is $50 to $60 in a legitimate market balancing in equilibrium supply and demand for the metal.
Today